双语音标领航，注音阅读启蒙，叶兴阳有声读物。
An Essay on Man, Moral Essays and Satires by Alexander Pope. Introduction. Pope's life as a writer falls into three periods, answering fairly enough to the three reigns in which he worked. Under Queen, and he was an original poet, but made little money by his verses. Under George I, he was chiefly a translator, and made much money by satisfying the French classical taste with versions of the Iliad and Odyssey. Under George I, he also edited Shakespeare, but with little profit to himself, for Shakespeare was but a Philistine in the eyes of the French classical critics. But as the 18th century grew slowly to its work, signs of a deepening interest in the real issues of life distracted men's attention from the culture of the snuffbox and the fan. As Pope's genius ripened, the best part of the world in which he worked was pressing forward. As a mariner who will no longer hug the coast but crowds all sail to cross the storms of a wide, unknown sea. Pope's poetry thus deepened with the course of time, and the third period of his life, which fell within the reign of George II, was that in which he produced the Essay on Man, the Moral Essays, and the Satires. These deal wholly with aspects of human life and the great questions they raise, according throughout with the doctrine of the poet, and of the reasoning world about him in his latter day, that the proper study of mankind is man, wrongs in high places, and the private infamy of many who enforce the doctrines of the Church, had produced in earnest men of vigorous antagonism. Tyranny and unreason of low-minded advocates had brought religion itself into question, and profligacy of courtiers, each worshipping the golden calf seen in his mirror, had spread another form of skepticism, the intellectual skepticism, based upon an honest search for truth, could end only in making truth the surer by its questionings. The other form of skepticism, which might be traced in England from the low-minded frivolities of the court of Charles II, was widely spread among the weak, whose minds flinched from all earnest thought. They swelled the number of the army of bold questioners upon the ways of God to man, but they were an idle rout of camp followers, not combatants. They simply ate, and drank, and died. In 1697, Pierre Bell published at Rotterdam his Historical and Critical Dictionary, in which the lives of men were associated with a comment that suggested, from the ills of life, the absence of divine care in the shaping of the world. Doubt was born of the corruption of society. Nature and man were said to be against faith in the rule of a God, wise, just, and merciful. In 1710, after Bell's death, Leibniz, a German philosopher then resident in Paris, wrote in French a book, with a title formed from Greek words meaning justice of God, theodicy, in which he met Bell's argument by reasoning that what we cannot understand confuses us, because we see only the parts of a great whole. Bell, he said, is now in heaven, and from his place by the throne of God, he sees the harmony of the great universe, and doubts no more. We see only a little part in which are many details that have purposes beyond our ken. The argument of Leibniz's theodicy was widely used, and although Pope said that he had never read the theodicy, his Essay on Man has a like argument. When any book has a wide influence upon opinion, its general ideas pass into the minds of many people who have never read it. Many now talk about evolution and natural selection, who have never read a line of Darwin. In the reign of George II, questionings did spread that went to the roots of all religious faith, and many earnest minds were busying themselves with problems of the state of man, and of the evidence of God in the life of man, and in the course of nature. Out of this came, nearly at the same time, two works wholly different in method and in tone, so different that at first sight it may seem absurd to speak of them together. They were Pope's Essay on Man, and Butler's Analogy of Religion, Natural and Revealed, to the Constitution and Course of Nature. Butler's Analogy was published in 1736. Of the Essay on Man, The first two epistles appeared in 1732, the third epistle in 1733, the fourth in 1734, and the closing universal hymn in 1738. It may seem even more absurd to name Pope's Essay on Man in the same breath with Milton's Paradise Lost. But to the best of his knowledge and power, in his smaller way, according to his nature and the questions of his time, Pope was, like Milton, endeavoring to justify the ways of God to man. He even borrowed Milton's line for his own poem, only weakening the verb, and said that he sought to vindicate the ways of God to man. In Milton's day, the questioning all centered in the doctrine of the fall of man, and questions of God's justice were associated with debate on fate, foreknowledge, and free will. In Pope's day, the question was not theological, but went to the root of all faith in existence of a God, by declaring that the state of man and of the world about him met such faith with an absolute denial. Pope's argument, good or bad, had nothing to do with questions of theology. Like Butler's, it sought for grounds of faith in the conditions on which doubt was rested. Milton sought to set forth the story of the fall in such way as to show that God was love. Pope dealt with the question of God in nature and the world of man. Pope's argument was attacked with violence by M. de Crousaz, professor of philosophy and mathematics in the University of Lausanne, and defended by Warburton, then chaplain to the Prince of Wales, in 6 letters published in 1739, and a 7th in 1740, for which Pope, who died in 1744, was deeply grateful. His offense in the eyes of de Crousaz was that he had left out of account all doctrines of orthodox theology. But if he had been orthodox of the orthodox, his argument obviously could have been directed only to the form of doubt it sought to overcome. And when his closing hymn was condemned as the Freethinkers' hymn, its censurers surely forgot that their arguments against it would equally apply to the Lord's Prayer, of which it is, in some degree, a paraphrase. The first design of the Essay on Man arranged it into 4 books, each consisting of a distinct group of epistles. The first book, in 4 epistles, was to treat of man in the abstract, and of his relation to the universe. That is the whole work as we have it now. The second book was to treat of man intellectual. The third book, of man social, including ties to church and state. The fourth book, of man moral, was to illustrate abstract truth by sketches of character. This part of the design is represented by the moral essays, of which 4 were written, to which was added, as a 5th, the Epistle to Addison, which had been written much earlier, in 1715, and first published in 1720. The 4 moral essays are 2 pairs. One pair is upon the characters of men and on the characters of women, which would have formed the opening of the subject of the 4th book of the essay. The other pair shows character expressed through a right or a wrong use of riches. In fact, money and morals. The 4 epistles were published separately. The 4th, to the Earl of Burlington, was first published in 1731, its title then being of taste. The 3rd, to Lord Bathurst, followed in 1732, the year of the publication of the first 2 epistles on the Essay on Man. In 1733, the year of publication of the 3rd epistle of the Essay on Man, Pope published his moral essay of the characters of men. In 1734 followed the 4th epistle of the Essay on Man, and in 1735 the characters of women, addressed to Martha Blount, the woman whom Pope loved, though he was withheld by a frail body from marriage. Thus the 2 works were, in fact, produced together, parts of one design. Pope's satires, which still deal with characters of men, followed immediately, some appearing in a folio in January 1735. That part of the epistle to Arbuthnot forming the prologue, which gives a character of Addison, as Atticus, had been sketched more than 12 years before, and earlier sketches of some smaller critics were introduced, but the beginning and the end, the parts in which Pope spoke of himself and of his father and mother, and his friend Dr. Arbuthnot, were written in 1733 and 1734. Then follows an imitation of the first epistle of the second book of the Satires of Horace, concerning which Pope told a friend, "When I had a fever one winter in town that confined me to my room for 5 or 6 days, Lord Bolingbroke, who came to see me, happened to take up a Horace that lay on the table, and, turning it over, dropped on the first satire in the second book, which begins, Sunt cabus in satira. He observed how well that would suit my case if I were to imitate it in English. After he was gone, I read it over, translated it in a morning or two, and sent it to press in a week or a fortnight after, February 1733. And this was the occasion of my imitating some others of the satires and epistles. The 2 dialogues finally used as the epilogue to the satires were first published in the year 1738, with the name of the year, 1738. Samuel Johnson's London. His first bid for recognition appeared in the same week, and excited in Pope not admiration only, but some active endeavor to be useful to its author. The reader of Pope, as of every author, is advised to begin by letting him say what he has to say, in his own manner, to an open mind that seeks only to receive the impressions which the writer wishes to convey. First, let the mind and spirit of the writer come into free, full contact with the mind and spirit of the reader, whose attitude at the first reading should be simply receptive. Such reading is the condition precedent to all true judgment of a writer's work. All criticism that is not so grounded spreads as fog over a poet's page. Read, reader, for yourself, without once pausing to remember what you have been told to think.
Hashem.
Pope's Poems. An Essay on Man. To H.S.D. John Lord Bolingbroke. The design. Having proposed to write some pieces of human life and manners, such as, to use my Lord Bacon's expression, come home to men's business and bosoms, I thought it more satisfactory to begin with considering man in the abstract, his nature and his state, since, to prove any moral duty, to enforce any moral precept, or to examine the perfection or imperfection of any creature whatsoever, it is necessary first to know what condition and relation it is placed in, and what is the proper end and purpose of its being. The science of human nature is, like all other sciences, reduced to a few clear points. There are not many certain truths in this world. It is therefore in the anatomy of the mind as in that of the body. More good will accrue to mankind by attending to the large, open, and perceptible parts, than by studying too much such finer nerves and vessels, the conformations and uses of which will forever escape our observation. The disputes are all upon these last, and, I will venture to say, they have less sharpened the wits than the hearts of men against each other, and have diminished the practice more than advanced the theory of morality. If I could flatter myself that this essay has any merit, it is in steering betwixt the extremes of doctrines seemingly opposite, in passing over terms utterly unintelligible, and in forming a temperate yet not inconsistent, and a short yet not imperfect system of ethics. This I might have done in prose, but I chose verse, and even rhyme, for 2 reasons. The one will appear obvious, that principles, maxims, or precepts so written, both strike the reader more strongly at first, and are more easily retained by him afterwards. The other may seem odd, but is true. I found I could express them more shortly this way than in prose itself, and nothing is more certain than that much of the force as well as grace of arguments or instructions depends on their conciseness. I was unable to treat this part of my subject more in detail, without becoming dry and tedious, or more poetically, without sacrificing perspicuity to ornament, without wandering from the precision, or breaking the chain of reasoning. If any man can unite all these without diminution of any of them, I freely confess he will compass a thing above my capacity. What is now published is only to be considered as a general map of man, marking out no more than the greater parts, their extent, their limits, and their connection, and leaving the particular to be more fully delineated in the charts which are to follow. Consequently, these epistles in their progress, if I have health and leisure to make any progress, will be less dry, and more susceptible of poetical ornament. I am here only opening the fountains, and clearing the passage, to deduce the rivers, to follow them in their course, and to observe their effects, may be a task more agreeable.
P.
Argument of Epistle I. Of the nature and state of man, with respect to the universe. Of man in the abstract. I. That we can judge only with regard to our own system, being ignorant of the relations of systems and things. v.17, etc.
2.
That man is not to be deemed imperfect, but a being suited to his place and rank in the creation, agreeable to the general order of things, and conformable to ends and relations to him unknown. v.35, etc.
3.
That it is partly upon his ignorance of future events, and partly upon the hope of future state, that all his happiness in the present depends. v.77, etc.
4.
The pride of aiming at more knowledge, and pretending to more perfection, the cause of man's error and misery, the impiety of putting himself in the place of God, and judging of the fitness or unfitness, perfection or imperfection, justice or injustice of his dispensations. v.109, etc. v. The absurdity of conceding himself the final cause of the creation, or expecting that perfection in the moral world, which is not in the natural. v.131, etc. 6. The unreasonableness of his complaints against Providence, while on the one hand he demands the perfections of the angels, and on the other the bodily qualifications of the brutes, though to possess any of the sensitive faculties in a higher degree would render him miserable. v.173, etc.
7.
That throughout the whole visible world, an universal order and gradation in the sensual and mental faculties is observed, which cause is a subordination of creature to creature, and of all creatures to man. The gradations of sense, instinct, thought, reflection, reason, that reason alone countervails all the other faculties. v.207.
8.
How much further this order and subordination of living creatures may extend, above and below us, were any part of which broken, not that part only, but the whole connected creation, must be destroyed. v.233.
9.
The extravagance, madness, and pride of such a desire. v.250. X. The consequence of all. The absolute submission due to Providence, both as to our present and future state. v.281, etc. To the end. Epistle I. Awake,
My St. John.
leave all meaner things to low ambition, and the pride of kings. Let us, since life can little more supply than just to look about us and to die, expatiate free o'er all this scene of man, a mighty maze, but not without a plan, a wild, where weeds and flowers promiscuous shoot, or garden tempting with forbidden fruit. Together let us beat this ample field, try what the open, what the covert yield, the latent tracks, the giddy heights, explore of all who blindly creep, or sightless soar, I nature's walks, shoot folly as it flies, and catch the manners living as they rise, laugh where we must, be candid where we can, but vindicate the ways of God to man. I say first, of God above, or man below what can we reason, but from what we know, of man, what see we but his station here, from which to reason, or to which refer? Through worlds unnumbered though the God be known, 'tis ours to trace him only in our own. He, who through vast immensity can pierce, see worlds on worlds compose one universe, observe how system into system runs, what other planets circle other suns, what varied being peoples every star, may tell why heaven has made us as we are. But of this frame, the bearings, and the ties, the strong connections, Nice dependencies, gradations just. Has thy pervading soul looked through? Or can a part contain the whole? Is the great chain that draws all to agree, and drawn supports, upheld by God, or thee?
2.
Presumptuous man, the reason wouldst thou find, why formed so weak, so little, and so blind? First, if thou canst, the harder reason guess, why formed no weaker, blinder, and no less. Ask of thy mother earth, why oaks are made taller or stronger than the weeds they shade. Or ask of yonder argent fields above, why Jove's satellites are less than Jove. Of systems possible, if 'tis confiest that wisdom infinite must form the best, where all must full or not coherent be, and all that rises, rise in due degree. Then, in the scale of reasoning life, 'tis plain, there must be, somewhere, such a rank as man. And all the question, wrangle e'er so long, is only this: if God has placed him wrong, respecting man, whatever wrong we call, must be right, as relative to all. In human works, though labored on with pain, 1,000 movements scarce one purpose gain. In God's one single can its end produce, yet serves to second to some other use. So man, who here seems principle alone, perhaps acts second to some sphere unknown, touches some will, or verges to some goal. 'Tis but a part we see, and not a whole. When the proud steed shall know why man restrains his fiery course, or drives him o'er the plains, when the dull ox, why now he breaks the clod, is now a victim, and now Egypt's god, then shall man's pride and dullness comprehend his actions, passions, beings, use and end, why doing, suffering, checked, impelled, and why this hour a slave, the next a deity.